I'm Lynn Coffin, and I'm going to do a presentation today on flash fiction. Flash fiction means short fiction. Flash fiction means anything up to, say, 1,000 or 1,500 words. It's a form of story, but it's a very, very short story. And it takes its inspiration, I think, partly from the legendary story about Hemingway writing a 6-word novel. His 6-word novel was Baby Shoes for Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. Then I come to find out that maybe that was actually not Hemingway's, but an actual ad in the Spokane Times, so you be the judge. But anyway, a lot contained in a very few words. So I'm going to read a bunch, well, not a bunch, but a few flash fictions, and I'd like to start with a very recent story of mine, which is somewhat macabre. But it's only one page, so if you find yourself not liking it, it's sort of like the weather, just hold your breath and it'll be over. And the name of this story is 2 Deaths in One Day. I'm curious if people will be able to identify the speaker in the story. So 2 Deaths in One Day, Ferrara, Italy, 1519. Thank you for coming, Eleonora. Do join me in some wine. I've already poured my own, as you see, but help yourself. No, I insist. This is Italy, after all, the 16th century. Let's put aside class distinctions and drink together. Good. That's my gentle Eleonora. A few more sips to soothe your heart, to make you forget wrongdoings, no matter how repeated. Don't make me coax you. A full glass of wine for thy stomach's sake. Thank you, thank you. I see where your gaze takes you. Yes, there she is on the bed. The latest of my babes. The reason you're here. The reason I am weak unto death. You seem very emotional, my dear. You put me to shame. I am ill, as I said, and cannot afford tears. But even were I not ill, I doubt I should weep with such copious disregard for caution. At any rate, there she lies, the 10th of my children. The priest came and did his watery little cross on her forehead. Isabella, we named her, as I named her, since Alfonso, my husband, whom you know, didn't really care to involve himself. The priest said he would mark the death a little later, when giving you and the Count time to be listed as Isabel's godparents. We think to placate the Almighty, though the Almighty never thinks to placate us. The Count has already signed. I believe you know the Count? Really? The 2 of you are married? Oh, how odd. I never thought of you as married. You were never together, you and the Count. Besides, that doesn't really answer the question, does it? I mean, 2 people can be married and scarcely know each other at all, don't you think? Alfonso and I have been married quite a while. He still manages to surprise me. Anyway, please do hurry and sign before, well, do sign, please. The form is right there on the desk, and writing implement right there. Thank you for signing, Eleonora. I was going to say you do me a great favor, but being a godparent in these circumstances is hardly in any trouble at all, is it? It's rather like a riddle. What child is the least trouble? Answer, a dead child. Oh, no, do please stop sniveling. Oh, Eleonora, no, and I insist you stay. Do pour me another glass of wine, please. No, not from that bottle. From the bottle over there on the sideboard, please. Yes. Oh, do be careful. Don't want you tripping up. Thank you. Perhaps you too would care for another. Of course. Although one is sufficient, isn't it? What do you think of the baby's looks? I find her the most attractive of my 10 children, I think. The ones who died early, the non-survivors, that is, were always the more attractive. See how much hair she has? And those little delicate fingers. You look as though you're wanting to leave. Why this sudden need to rush away, I wonder? To get a basket for the baby? I've thought of that already, my dear. I think of everything, you know. I'm famous for it. That's why they made me governor of Spoleto. You underestimate me. That's the problem here. You and Alfonso have that in common. A tiny coffin will arrive shortly, cushioned inside, so a basket would be extraneous. And it's not like Isabella will roll off the bed, is it? Isabella has killed me in a way. The two of you have actually killed me, now that I think of it. Or should I say, the three of you. Because even though my dear Alfonso is a man and needs to be excused of almost anything on those grounds, still, there are things a wife finds hard to excuse. Well, I scarcely know what I'm saying, but 10 babies is 9 babies too much. As I see it, I'll not live to see the end of the month. So today I have decided to tie off a few loose ends. What? You don't understand? Oh, I think you do. Doesn't my husband Alfonso praise you in private for always understanding? You're flushing now. Is that from some emotion you find difficult to articulate? What, grief, you say? And speak with such charming, uncustomary feminine softness. Grief because of my baby? Perhaps, but I suspect it's more guilt. Dear me, who is the ill one here? You're now so pale, dear Eleanor. I fear for your health. What? Ring for help? I hardly think we've come to that. Why don't you just sit down and we'll take stock of the situation? Oh dear, I meant on a chair, but I suppose any place is as good as any other now. You really need to speak up, though. You spoke up when you were with Alfonso. I heard you clearly through the wall, whereas his voice was indistinct. Perhaps his head was buried where it shouldn't have been. Now, no need for tears. I gather the sight of dear Isabella has occasioned your sudden breakdown, unusual in one so young. The sight of a dead innocent overcame your tender heart, and you collapsed. That's what I will say to our Alfonso. Perhaps he will miss you, especially when I too am gone. But he will marry again, enjoy extramarital delights again. Eleonora? Well, I'll wait a while to be sure you have nothing more to say. I am known, among other things, for my patience. But 2 deaths in one day is really a bit much. So that's the end of the first story. And in case you hadn't guessed well, maybe if you write me, I'll tell you the narrator. No, it was Lucretia Borgia. And this is semi-historical. Okay, and then, so that, I want you to get a sense of the feel of a flash fiction. That's a whole story there. Something happens, something changes, but it's done very quickly. This is another flash fiction, even shorter. And this is a story that I keep writing and rewriting. I got the idea from a friend of mine. I really like the idea here. It's told from a male point of view, which is easier to get across when you're reading a page. When you're seeing a female reading the words, it sounds like it's must be a female, but I intend this to be a male narrator. I like this idea here, and I keep working and reworking it. I even reworked this one last night. It's called Fiberglass. So Sam hired me as a handyman when I dropped out of college. I slept in the guest house. During the day, I helped Sam paint and carry stuff, nothing very difficult. It was kind of a relief after college to just be working with another guy doing basic stuff and not saying much. At night, I usually played the piano for his wife, Sally. Sally was halfway between me and Sam in age and really pretty. She especially liked classical music. The Moonlight Sonata was her favorite. She could never get enough of that, especially the later sections when it gets kind of intense. She had majored in music, she said, then she got married. Sally would sit out in the balcony with both doors open and I'd play the piano. After I'd played a while, I'd go sit in the balcony with her. Sam was never around. We'd drink cold duck and talk. I felt like I could talk about anything with her. It was weird how close I felt to Sally. Sometimes she felt a little bit like somebody's mom, but mostly she was the kind of girlfriend I'd never had. I kept wanting to kiss her. I kept wondering what it would feel like to have my lips against hers. It was weird. Sally said we were soulmates. But tonight was one of those nights when the wind kept blowing after dark and Sam decided to go night sailing. Sally said he was an idiot sailing without running lights. I could tell she had no hope of changing his mind. The only surprise was when Sam asked if I wanted to go. I said no, I was only an armchair sailor. I felt like a traitor for some reason. After Sam left, Sally got 2 chairs and a flashlight. She carried the chairs and an uncorked cold duck down to the beach. I brought the flashlight and 2 glasses. We sat there, but we hadn't seen anything out on the lake, and we heard the boom of a collision, a flurry of rattles and clangs, and then silence again. I turned to reassure Sally, but she was standing waist deep in the lake, calling, "Sam, Sam!" holding up her wine glass in one hand and the bottle in the other as if she were afraid they might get wet. I went and untied Sam's fishing skiff. The rope was swollen and hard to unknot. I yanked till the engine shuddered into life and then headed out, holding the flashlight so it pointed over the bow and threw in its light whenever the boat came down hard. After a few minutes, Sam loomed ahead of me, his sail splayed out to the side. He tacked abruptly, slowed, and stopped. I came alongside and cut the engine. "Romberg ran into me," Sam said. He took the flashlight up front to check the damage while I sat holding the boats together but apart. I called to Sam over the sound of the loose sail and the blocks jangling against the boom. "Sam, I left Sally standing in 3 feet of water trying to call you back from the dead." "Yeah, she gets like that when she drinks," Sam said. "You can go now and head back. I'll head in." I was at the end of the dock when Sam drifted into reach. I grabbed the forestay. Before Sam even had the line tied, Sally was on the dock. "I knew this would happen," she said. "Nothing happened," Sam said. Sally turned and left. I watched her wind her way through the beach grass until she reached the house. A square of light flared as she opened the door. Then everything went black again. "Maybe you should have had running lights," I said. Sam shrugged. "A little fiberglass and she'll be better than new. After fiberglass hardens, it's stronger than whatever was there before. I put some under the seats last year. Now they could take 2 of me. That's how it is. Hey, you want to join me in a 6-pack? I don't know if beer goes good on cold duck," I said, "but sure, why not?" So that's fiberglass. What I like about that, and this is not original with me, is this idea of the fiberglass on the boat, I think, is a metaphor for the marriage. This is a young kid, and he doesn't understand bonds. Sam and Sally are never going to get divorced, and he sort of recognizes that, at least unconsciously, through Sally's behavior and what Sam says. Here's a strictly autobiographical flash fiction about the same length, and it's based on my time in Tbilisi, Georgia. I am a translator of Georgian poetry and was hired as an assistant professor in Tbilisi at the Tbilisi University, and well, the story will tell you the rest. I'm going to take a sip of this to help my voice.
What's the name of the story again?
It's I don't really have a title. That's a very good question. Thanks for. Actually, it's called The Face of God. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. So this is The Face of God. Everything about this is absolutely true except the very last, when I sort of give the religious studies teacher a wisdom that she actually didn't have at that moment. Okay. Recently, I found myself in front of a religious studies class for speakers of English in Tbilisi, Georgia. I had arrived the week prior expecting to lecture on American poetry, but ended up here. The teacher, a distinguished professor, meaning older than I am, had wandered off somewhere, and so I was leading the class. I was not afraid. The classes at Ilia University consist of 102% girls. Very willing, obedient girls at that. They never challenge. They never argue. Like lovely little birds, they seem eager to swoop down upon whatever breadcrumbs of knowledge you might leave behind you on your way to the witch's cottage. John Kennedy's inaugural speech had been their homework. The general idea of the class was to discover the one word the text could be boiled down to, whatever that might be. Before leaving, the distinguished professor had elicited from the class that Kennedy's inaugural address could be boiled down to the word God. Georgia is an Orthodox country. I had entertained the class for a few moments by my true story of shaking John Kennedy's left hand when I was a teenager. He had been going down a line of people campaigning for president, shaking every third or fourth hand. He missed me and shook hands with the woman on my right, so I reached out and shook his left hand. But my tactile brush with greatness bought me only a few minutes of escape from scholastic tedium. I asked to see somebody's text, hoping the written word might inspire me. And I saw in the dog-eared text this note, quote, "Most British and American citizens think of God as an older man with a long white beard," end quote. You can imagine my reaction. Trying for a platonic approach, I asked them what they thought of this comment. "It's very interesting," they said. But why was it interesting, I asked. Well, because now they had a better realization of British and American religions. "Don't you see how dangerous this remark is?" I asked. They did not. "What if I were to say most Georgian citizens think of God in this way?" "Oh no," they told me. "Most Georgians don't think of God the silly way British and Americans do." "He was only 33, one fresh-faced miss informed me. I tried a different tact. "So how do you imagine God?" I asked. "I don't have to imagine him," someone said. "I know about him from the Bible." You could hear the capital H. "Well," I said, "but you're talking about Jesus, right?" "Jesus Christ," someone corrected me. "But if you talk about God the Father," I continued, "how do you describe or imagine him?" I tried to make my question sound the way I saw it in my mind, no capital letters whatsoever. "When I think of God," someone in the back row said dreamily, "I think of all white, white without any black. So would it be correct to say most Georgians think of God as a big white cloud, I asked. There was a chorus of no's. They were clearly upset. At this rate, when the distinguished professor returned, it would be to find me presiding over an empty classroom. Okay, I said, well, why do you think someone might imagine God as an older white man? I had made a significant capitulation, it seemed to me, but they were not having any of it. Well, perhaps if someone thinks of God this way, it's because they think of older people like teachers as knowing more than they do. And white because we tend to think God somehow looks like us. Isn't that true? Silence. I forged ahead. The historical records, I said, indicate that Jesus was rather dark-skinned, olive-complexioned. Yet your icons... It was at this point the distinguished professor wandered back. I could have kissed her. I showed her the note in the text. I said I found the comment objectionable. But is it not true, she asked. I don't know, but to say millions of people see God in this silly way is just wrong. She smiled. You are a Buddhist, yes? Yes. So how do Buddhists imagine God? Most Buddhists don't imagine God at all because most Buddhists don't believe in him. Buddhism isn't... She smiled. Haven't you just made a huge general statement without backing it up? Well, but the only girl in the class with short hair informed us class time was up. Another girl pointed out the midterm would be in 2 weeks. Okay, said the professor. For next week's review, we'll use Chavchavadze's Hanging Man and boil it down to the key word. We all smiled. Literature was not exactly safe to talk about, but it was definitely a haven from religion. And that was a key moment in my time in Tbilisi. Okay, then I'll read just a couple of really short ones from my collection, and we'll be done very quickly. I don't know if you'll find this interesting. I like the central metaphor that's contained here, and it's called Among Friends. She's telling her friends what happened. They agree it is good for her to do this. She begins by saying she went on a bike ride while her boyfriend took a nap. On the last lap of the ride, she saw a female duck constructing a nest in a railroad track. Such an obvious symbol, she says. I should have known then. When she got home, she woke John and they sat on the porch watching the sun go down. Talk about heavy-handed irony, she says. She asked him was he going to get a tuner. The piano had arrived that afternoon and sounded a little wonky. His mother had left him the piano instead of money. He didn't exactly play. When she asked him about the tuner, he turned to her and yelled, "Get out of here!" Then what, her friends inquire. Then I got out, she says. It was his house, after all. She is proud of herself for having behaved sensibly. Her friends want to know, is she going back? She says no. They ask, well, what about her things? When is she going to get them? She decides to get new friends. She stays with one friend overnight. The next day, she collects her things at John's while he's at work. She is surprised at how little there is to collect. She leaves the key on the bedside table and a crumpled goodbye note in the kitchen trash. She stays with another friend overnight. The day after that, she moves. A few days later, she starts making new friends. Actually, two more. One is a gloss on the same story. or the same characters, and I think it might be useful to read that. It's called A Fable for John, and since I didn't plan on marking, I don't have it done out here, but it's right here. A Fable for John. This story takes place many years ago in the mountainous region of a foreign country. A man had heard wonderful things about a certain woman, and he wrote her a letter. The man said in his letter he would like to come and visit the woman. The woman wrote back and suggested they get to know each other in letters first. Letters flew back and forth between the man and the woman. The woman wrote and told the man she hoped he would come to visit her. The man wrote back and said he would come to visit her soon. He asked the woman to come part of the way to meet him. The woman said she would. Letters flew back and forth between the man and the woman. The day came when they were to meet. The woman went to the meeting place, but the man wasn't there. She went home upset. The next letter from the man spoke about his difficulties on the road. The postmark on the letter was that of his hometown. Letters flew back and forth between the man and the woman. In his letters, the man said he loved the woman and would come to visit her soon. The letters were always postmarked from his hometown. The woman wrote a complaining letter. She told the man she loved him, but was angry he had never really left home. The man said he was sorry. He quoted travel authorities about how difficult the road was. He asked in his letter if the woman still trusted him. The woman wrote and said no. The man wrote and said her distrust was the reason he had never started out. The woman wrote and said his not starting out was the reason she distrusted him. Letters flew back and forth between the man and the woman. The time between letters grew. Both of them stopped writing. The two never met. Okay. So, a very cheerful and optimistic flash fiction to close. I think that people's reactions to flash fiction it's sort of like maybe having a snack as opposed to a meal. And usually, of course, a meal would be more nutritious and have more impact, but with a snack you can focus on sometimes on just one thing and really enjoy that. So this very short piece is called The Butterfly. These are all from the first honeymoon, the last three. The Butterfly. A woman sat in a clearing on a bright spring day. She was in the woods, in a clearing, in nature, in the freedom halfway between presence and absence. She sat not far from a stream amid swaying grasses, feeling the breezes, listening to the birds around her sing the incidental music at the heart of silent happenings. This was a sacred space, and she was free to come and go. It was a place she knew, a place that knew her, a place that was always different and the same. He had asked her what she wanted, and she said, intimacy. She meant free being together in the openness of a world that began as an expression of love and freedom. But speech was treacherous, and meaning was the narrowest part of significance. When she said intimacy, he had seen greenhouses, plants being tricked and trained into loveliness. He had seen glass walls and hot, wet air, focused lights and soil in plastic bags. He had seen schedules and expenses and all the mechanisms of managed growth. She sat in the woods letting the sun tell time, open to the light, to the shade, to the stream that wandered past her and the west wind that played with her hair, and the woods and meadows that stood their ground. She was a creature among other creatures, single but not alone, strong and delicate, free in the wideness and the wildness of God's mercy. And as she was sitting there quietly, a white butterfly came and flickered in the air around her. Slowly she extended her hand, palm up, in invitation. And after a moment, the butterfly fluttered down to this heart of her open hand and rested there. For a moment, lighter and briefer and clearer than words, there was touch. There was connection. Then he flew away, as butterflies do, to resume his beautiful, tremulous journey. She knew better than to chase a creature with wings and let him go. She got up and walked leisurely home. She felt happy, she felt loving, she felt hopeful. The world was full of gifts and possibilities. Even now, he might be calling, the one she felt drawn to in spirit and truth. Not like a moth is drawn to a flame, more like a white butterfly, responding to the invitation of a perfectly open hand. Thank you very much for the reading, listening to the reading. I invite comments. Maybe you have a comment or a question?
Well, my favorite was the first one, 2 deaths in one day.
Which was what, 2 deaths? Really?
Yeah. I guess and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not tell me at all, but I interpreted that she poisoned
Yes.
Eleonora. Yeah, okay.
Right.
I just gave away the ending.
Right. That's very interesting. I'm really glad because that's the newest one. Often when I'm listening to my stories or reading my stories, I think of this young violinist actually an older violinist went to hear a young violinist play, and he said how painful it was for him to do this because if the young violinist played well, he was jealous. Mm-hmm. And if the young violinist played badly, he was bored and upset. And it's like that when I read my stories, my older stories. If they're good, I think, God, that was good. I'm never going to be able to write that well again. And if they're bad, I think, God, that was bad. I should never have been a writer. So it's always the best. If you want to praise a writer after a reading, always praise the most recent thing that they've written.
Okay.
So that really works. Do you have any questions or uncertainties about the stories?
Let's see, the Fable for John, as I was listening to that, I found that one really sad, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it is it's a story of a breakup, and this same couple, unhappy couple, basically ruffling on my life, and the metaphor. I mean, I think metaphors or images have probably motivated me in writing more than anything else. So the image of this duck, which I actually saw on a bike ride, of this duck who had built her nest in a railroad track.
Ooh.
And it was an active railroad track. I think it was once a week the train came through or something. So it was like, and then, to have anything traumatic happen right after that. Or I'm going to do a presentation in Great Books on Jung, and I really love reading about Jung's archetypes and his images. And I have my best friend who's actively dying, and I haven't been allowed to see her. And it really hurts. I think of it all the time. There's no good reason. I just want to be able to be there for a few minutes to give her comfort. Mm-hmm. And I'm not allowed. And it just... So last night I opened the tarot cards, which I sometimes do, and at random chose a card, and it was death upside down. And so that image, not just the thought, but the image is... So I love poems where you can imagine and you can see the thing that's being described.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you were here. This is Celeste is here with me.
Hi.
She said that of the stories I read today, she liked best the 2 deaths in one day. I guess would you tend to like mystery stories and suspense?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I think that's When did it dawn on you? When did you first suspect that maybe Eleanor was being poisoned.
Where she takes the one wine and you're like, no, not that one.
Right. Yeah, that's a clue, right?
Yeah, no, it was good.
All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate reading.
Yeah, of course.